Ready when you are, Ellen.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did.
Oh, we're on.
All right, what is up, everybody? Thanks for joining us, and if you're watching the recording too, as well, hopefully y'all get something out of it. Feel free to, like for this session, feel free if there are questions that do come up. Totally down to answer them live as they come. Just go ahead and just put it into the chat. Ellen did enable the chat feature, and then Ellen, just call it out once a kind of a natural pause. We'll try to keep the questions closest to the topics when they're presented. I just find that it's probably a little bit easier to just kind of keep all the information consolidated, especially for people watching it in the future. So yeah, like as stuff comes up, there are no bad questions. I mean, this is designed to be a very introductory, for people that are just getting into it, that are just kind of curious about getting into it. And I'm pretty much assuming that there is a fairly minimal level of experience when it comes to even backcountry stuff, and as well as sledding and snowmobiling. So we're gonna go ahead and yeah, jump into it. So Weston, we do Weston. We're the ones that are putting this on this clinic on. We do a bunch of these types of clinics. We do like backcountry 101s. We work on a lot of events. Who we are, if you guys are not familiar with us, for anybody that's new. So Weston, we make skis, snowboards, split boards. We're currently actually the second largest split board manufacturer in the world. And so, we're pretty stoked on that. We are a top 25 backcountry brand when you look at like all the backcountry brands across all winter platforms. So that was a very cool thing. We're very much a values oriented. We believe in preserving this planet. We want to make sure that our grandkids have snow to ride in the future. So we are a 1% for the planet member. That means 1% of our revenue goes not towards just climate change, but also access. Preserving our access and ensuring that public lands stay public is very important for winter recreationalists and just outdoor recreationalists in general. And we are also a certified B Corp, which means essentially that we are, very committed to having a quote unquote sustainable. I know when everybody thinks sustainable, they really think environmental, but a lot of it is how we pay our people, how do we manage our supply chains, and how do we ensure that our company is structured as such. So that's the skinny on who we are. Essentially, if you ski board or split board, hit us up if you ever need some hard goods that allows us to continue to do these types of clinics. Who I am, I'm the owner and the president of Weston. It's a small company. There's only about 8 of us, but currently, but we've got big goals. Me personally, I've been riding in the backcountry since about 1996. I've been sledding since 2010, so coming up on 15 years now. And I actually consider myself a Slednecker since 2018. Well, the moment I bought a full face helmet and left my snowboard at home, which I'll get to, I left my snowboard in the truck. I was like, okay, like it has officially switched over. Um, I've owned about 9 different sleds throughout my tenure with snowmobiling. I've owned Yamahas, I've owned Arctic Cats, I've owned Polarises. I'm currently on a Gen 4 850 turbo. That's just been an absolute sweet sled for me. And backcountry experience wise, I do have my Airy Rec 2 as well as my Wolfer, even though I need to get that recertified. And generally speaking, I just love getting people stoked on POW. My background was I was about to become a backcountry guide, but this, working with Weston was actually a just as good way to get people stoked to get out there. So, what we're going to cover. And if we have time, I will spend a little bit more time on avalanche stuff. But again, this is not to replace an avalanche course by any means, or this is not to replace any sort of real training. I mean, there's nothing beats just hiring a guide and getting out there and doing it. Even though there's very few sled skiing guides, but as you guys will see, like the better you are at snowmobiling, the better you're going to be at sled skiing. So what I'm going to cover is just choosing your sled, setting up your sled. That's the, preparing to ride, and, making sure you get kind of, your equipment in this, just like in backcountry skiing, is very equally as important, if not, more important than the skills itself. It just the difference between an awesome day in the backcountry and just a total epic could be simply what you have in your gear. I will go through some of the riding basics, as well as particularly when it comes to having multiple people on the sled or being towed behind the sled, as well as ethics. In our there's rules in every playground, whether it be spoken or unspoken, and get into some zone beta Q&A. I know this is a digital clinic, and I know this, we just have a few live participants here. But if there are questions, feel free to hit us up at info at. I'd love getting people into this type of stuff. So really looking forward to covering it off. So general question, who has been backcountry skiing or riding before we started, the recording. At least we're chatting with some of the participants here, and it sounds like there is experience with the backcountry, and there is some experience with sledding as well. And honestly, if you have 10 years of sledding, I've known met a lot of snowmobilers out there that haven't had much sled ski experience, and have can benefit from learning this too. So even if you are an expert level snowmobiler, and obviously if you're an expert level snowboarder or skier getting into sledding, this course is going to be perfect for y'all. So really, what's so different? And I think as a backcountry rider, a lot of this transfers over. We get out there for all sorts of different reasons. For me personally, having access to POW just is what draws it. Like once you've gone into the backcountry, pretty much spoiled. And in this, I said, assuming you know how to you can hunt for the POW well, but honestly it's like shooting fish in a barrel. It's very different though. We're our own ski patrol out there. And when it comes to snowmobiling, you have a 500-pound machine that can go up to upwards 70, 80 miles per hour on trail. You can get really far from your trailhead really fast. You can get out of range really, really fast. So I think that there's really a lot of more factors to consider the second you bring snowmobiling into the picture, even compared to touring. Even just as in itself. I mean, snowmobiling, I think sometimes people will almost see it as like, and I know for me personally, I misjudged how difficult snowmobiling would be. But at the same time, I think I underestimated how much fun snowmobiling is too. So, I think with one huge change in the way that we kind of hunt for powder is in the backcountry. The day after the storm, like in resort, everybody's chasing for that first chair, that first line. Not necessarily the best day, the best day to be chasing it into the backcountry. And I think that mindset often gets people in trouble. The avalanche danger is just as high. And when you factor in snowmobiling, road access, whether it's groomed, whether you're putting in your own roads, and your overall skill makes a huge difference in terms of your ability to access and to do laps. If you've put in an access track, a tow track, and you don't let it set up, you're going to be getting stuck a lot more. So, being able to, potentially just follow in other people's tracks, ride on other people's single tracks, if it is a snowcat, if it's a plowed and maintained area, so again, the days right after the storm are may not be the best days to go out riding, and could actually be turn your day into a little bit more of an epic trying to get super excited. So and then it's a beautiful thing though too. Just go ride the resort right after the POW, head into the backcountry on your snowmobile like, a few days after, once things have settled, once the hungry ones have gotten all the stuck and put in the road for you. So, and always be important. So this is something that when when I first got into to snowmobiling, I went and asked a buddy of mine who had experience with snowmobiling, and he told me these two things. And just being the stubborn bastard that I was like, nah, that's not gonna, none of this isn't gonna happen to me. And so he said that there are two things that is inevitably going to happen if you buy a snowmobile and you get into sled skiing. And even if you're just going out with your friends for the day, like you will find that these two things will happen, is you will get stuck a lot. And, for me, I was like, all right, I'm going to be staying on the trail. I'm just using access only. And my buddy was like, yeah, sure, whatever, dude. Like you're going to learn to get unstuck. No. And, no doubt the first day I took the sled out, I've decided to, go cowboy, and I got off trail and I got just epically stuck. Had shoveled out a huge, practically a helipad just so I could get unstuck. We'll get to that a little bit more about stuck mobiling is what I call it. And you're pretty much gonna, if you really committed to snowmobiling, you're gonna get good at stuck mobiling, and you're gonna learn a lot about stuck mobiling. And there's probably just as much skill in getting yourself unstuck, depending on the number of people you have, as there is as snowmobiling. And if you can get over that first hurdle, I think you're going to end up loving snowmobiling so much you won't want to ski again. And I find I'm even now I spend half of my time just on my snowmobile, especially on some of those high danger days, because I have just as good of a time riding a really low angle hill on my snowmobile as I do taking my board out and riding it. And so like I can actually avoid avalanche terrain and increase my enjoyment to risk ratio by just keeping it low and getting on throttle. But I still love to ski, and that's why why I ride a lot. So choosing the sled. We are in an era where there are a lot of very, very good sleds out there. Essentially mountain sleds are they get better and better. I was talking before the thing, that honestly it's just the geometry of the sleds that seem to be changing the most, with regards to how they ride, with different track angles. But the good thing is the engines, by and large, the combustion engine's been a combustion engine for a long time. And, electronic electronic fuel injected versus carbureted, has been the standard since, the mid 2000s. So like honestly, any mid 2000s and above, honestly, the newer, the better, just it's more reliable. And, less kind of shenanigans when you're out there trying to figure out, in the backcountry. And honestly, like the heck, I mean, you can get a turbo, a boosted, a newish boosted Gen 4 Ski-Doo for, 7, 8 grand, get a couple few of your buddies together or whatever. But so the main brands are Polaris and Ski-Doo. And Arctic Cat actually officially announced that they were not going to be operating this year, or making any more sleds this year, which is really kind of sad. But I'm most likely they're going to get bought up. But in today's world, Polaris, especially if you're looking at a sled in the last like 5 years, 5 to 7 years, Polaris and Ski-Doo dominated. just they really just dominate the field, especially in terms of mountain sleds. Now, obviously, there are more options out there. And I'll get to some of those, but just some very basics about Polaris versus Ski-Doo. And this is just based on my own personal experience. There's everybody is going to have a lot of their own opinions about it. I think that Polaris is oftentimes very performance oriented, and that means they will tune their sleds for performance. And as such, my Polarises tend to run a little bit lean. They'll do a couple things to kind of up the tuning on it to make it a really really fun sled to ride, but you have to kind of learn to ride a high performance machine, just like a Ferrari or a Lamborghini. It just requires another level of maintenance, if you will, versus like a Toyota or like a Subaru. Polaris's generally has been lightest weight. The first sled I bought my wife, was 5 pounds from being a sub 400-pound sled, and it was bone stock with an exhaust. So like they are more lightweight. There's things that Polaris does to kind of keep that weight down. But Ski-Doo is probably the next most prominent one, and I think both of them are making headways towards each other. I generally equate Ski-Doos as being more reliable. They generally have some more techie stuff. I think that Ski-Doos, they don't push their engines like so hard that it just chews up all the components, and I think that's ultimately what happens to a lot of Polarises, that they just they're such performance driven. Whereas I feel like with Ski-Doo typically has a little bit more of a reliable, like they're not pushing it as hard. Sometimes they have like more tech that makes it super annoying. Don't this, I don't know if this is common knowledge or not, but like on a lot of older Polarises and maybe even newer Polarises, you can just unplug the ignition. You lose your key out there, or you lose your you lose your tether or something. You just unplug it, and you can just fire the thing right up and still be able to ride and have a whole day on it. You don't have a you probably won't have your fuel, your meter or whatever, your speedometer or anything like that, but you could unplug it and you just hack your way and you could just still be able to ride. Whereas like we've had to leave Ski-Doos in the field because somebody lost a tether. It's just a super, it's just a safety thing that they put on there, that just was kind of annoying. And we had to go get another key remade just to be able to get that sled out. So there was kind of like, all right, some of the features and stuff do lend itself to the kind of the overall reliability. Arctic Cats were honestly the best in the early teens, in like the 2010s to I want to say 2013, 2014. Most of the pros were riding M8s, riding Arctic Cats. But they have since fallen off. I'm pretty sure they're still Suzuki built engines. They're not owned by Suzuki. They're owned by, so I forgot what the private equity firm was. But anyways, like they're funny. This is from last year. They said, "Don't call it a comeback." No, don't call it a comeback, because they did not come back. So I think when it comes to sled types, there's generally speaking, um, I think that there's mountain sleds and trail sleds. I think a lot of people that get into sled skiing for sled skiing make the mistake of going with a trail sled, because it just, it seems like it's a great option, right? It's the wider track. It's you make the same assumptions that I make, and it was like, hey, I'm going to keep this to mostly trails and roads and stuff like that. And the reality of it is that's not the case. The reality of it is most of these mountain roads, somebody had mentioned that they're potentially looking at doing Holy Cross. That trail is not the most well maintained sometimes. Yeah, you can get a lot of places, especially if you're using it for access and getting into trying to get to trailheads that are not accessible in the wintertime. There are going to be segments of that road that it's not a road anymore. You are pretty much needing to slide hill across a slide path, or cut through some trails. I know somebody mentioned they just went over to Jones, and it's until later on in the season, especially as you get steeper and steeper onto that hill, if there wasn't for a snow cap, that road just has straight up disappeared. And so I think that going with a mountain sled from the get-go is probably the smarter thing to do, because you're just going to get yourself into certain scenarios where you're wishing you had a mountain sled with a trail sled. Now, that being said, if you literally are like, all right, I'm just going to ride this thing at Vail Pass when the roads are open and so on and so forth. But I think it just, for that inevitable reason that you're going to want to learn to, you're going to want to ride this thing as a snowmobile, it gives you that option. And so I think that, my preference is, go for the mountain sleds. Just, skip over the trail sled as an intermediate. There's a few different types of engines. I will just flat out say, don't do anything but a two-stroke. I've owned Yamahas. Yamahas were known for four-stroke, and back in the day, people got four strokes because they would add aftermarket turbos on them. And they got a lot of really good performance, especially people that were hill climbing their snowmobiles. But with factory tuned two-stroke turbos, like, that kind of completely negated it, especially with very reliable EFI. And so it's something that's unnecessary. And the downside with four strokes too is you can't turn them upside down. They're super heavy. And because when you turn them upside down and oil gets into the combustion changer, you can blow an engine really fast. Yeah, sure, you can add in an oil catch can and all these things that prevent that kind of stuff. But unless you're really already into kind of wanting to putz around and modify your snowmobile, it's not like ready to go like right out the gate. So I don't think that having a four stroke now, what people oftentimes will point at a four stroke and say, hey, this is why you should go with the four stroke, because you can rack up 15, 20, 30,000 miles on a four stroke without, ever having any engine problems. But I guarantee you, after about 5,000 miles, you're going to have tracks, you're going to have clutch, you're going to have all these other things that you're going to have to go through once you start hitting those higher numbers. So just having an engine runs that can run everything else that's, already beat to the ground. I had one of my earliest sleds with this Yamaha Phaser, and that's exactly what happened. The engine was still running, but it had like quarter inch paddles on the track when I was done with it. All of my suspension and my steering components and all my bushings were completely blown, corroded, and eroded away. And I was having a hard time finding a lot of replacement parts for that, because it was an older snowmobile. And so, just because that snowmobile lasted so long, electric sleds, they're coming up fast. Ski-Doo, announced that they were putting in, I forgot what it was, like 350 million or something, and their hope was to have an electric option for all their power sports. Now, you can imagine how, the diehard Slednecks feel about that. And, it's borderline hilarious anytime an electric sled is even brought up in some of those forums. But I would say, the tech, personally for me, the tech isn't there yet. The range is just not there yet. You can dial down the range, but the thing is with snowmobiling, it's such a high torque, high horsepower thing when it comes to riding in powder snow, that it's not like being able to just switch something, and I'm going to ride a summer trail on electric dirt bike and be able to get another 50 miles out of this thing. Like, I think those things max out at like 25, 30 miles, and I can do that easily in a half a day, and not being able to go back to the car and top off my fuel tank is a challenge. think I'm keeping my pulse on it. I think the technology will get better, and you're going to see them a lot in rental sleds and so on and so forth. But I just am not I'm not convinced that they're the best thing for sled skiing and true snowmobiling yet. I think it will happen eventually. And to be honest, like for access reasons too, with how quiet they are, um, it is something that is very attractive to keeping public lands, public and potentially even opening up more areas that are skirt close to wild wilderness terrain, close to kind of like wildlife preserve areas where sound is a very important issue. That could really help with a lot of access issues, but I don't think we're going to be seeing that type of stuff and that type of turnaround for the next 15 to 20 years. When it comes to how much should I budget for this, you can get a sled for less than 3K. But recognize that what you are saving there, you are going to have to, essentially you're going to probably put in more, just as much on the back end as well, in terms of just general upkeep, general maintenance, and if you're not a sled mechanic, you're going to become a mechanic. Because if you take that thing to the shop every single time something goes wrong, be prepared to spend at least $200-300 and have it down. You're going to be in the shop for 1 or 2 weeks, and if in a season where we have 3 great months of sled skiing, that's potentially 10% of your season right there, just down because of it. And so if you learn, and honestly, we all know with YouTube these days, there's you can learn a lot on just the basics of it. And so you can get a new sled, is non-boosted, expect to spend 10 to 12K. There's financing, but it's expensive. But sometimes that reliability is worth it. Being able to get out there, know that you can trust your sled, know that you're going to have a factory warranty that's going to help to cover anything that's particularly engine related. Most of the time, if it's engine related, it's covered under warranty. So yeah, that's kind of it's essentially the trade off between the snowmobiles, and I've gone both directions, and I've been totally happy with the used sleds that I've bought. I think there are some sleds to try to avoid when you're looking at a used sled. Um, Highly modified sleds, I think, is challenging because that just it most likely means it's been run really hard. Um, I personally think that there's a lot of sleds out there that are just like access sleds, that were pretty much just used to like access a cabin or something like that. That stayed on trail, and they don't have super high miles. Yeah, sure, you might be paying a little bit more for something like that, and even sleds that come out from rental places. Like if you think about the type of clientele that are riding it, that's not your Slednecker. That's not 500 miles of 8,000 RPM, for that entire 5,000 miles. It's or 500 miles. It's 500 miles of people that are just scared of this machine. And so sometimes those sleds do rack up in miles, but I think like you'd be surprised how nice those sleds are in terms of and the shops generally speaking know how to maintain sleds. And so I think that towards the end of the season, those are oftentimes some good places to look for some good deals, because you do find some really cheap sleds that have high miles, but low usage is what I really kind of hard usage is what I'm looking for when I'm looking at used sleds. Like what's the minimal amount of hard usage that you can get out of it? And again, like performance parts are just an easy thing to be like, okay, that person was out to ride it hard.
Hey Leo,
So
first question of the night, from
very
Ryan.
cheap.
Did you learn how to work on the two strokes with experience or any formal education?
No formal education. I used to work on cars, and mostly bolt-on stuff. I'd rarely cracked an engine block without somebody that knew what they were doing. Two strokes are very easy to work on, and snowmobiles in general, I think, are very easy to work on as a whole because you can access parts. You can access the entire machine. You're not having to take down so much stuff to access it. And if there's one thing that I've learned about the snowmobiling community as a whole too, is people are always they're probably just as willing as backcountry skiing to kind of share about how to look at something and diagnose something. And even the mechanics that work at the shops or will often, you could sometimes just bring them in there and just pay them for an hour's worth of diagnostics and figure out what exactly it is that you need to go and fix. They'll drop it back off on your truck, not running. You don't need a running snowmobile to take it out. And so, and then they're just like, all right, well, if I were you, I'd change this sensor, this, that, or swap this thing out, and this is where your issue is, and go and do it. And they're probably happy to do it. So, I definitely have learned a lot as I go. I think just working on basic stuff in terms of just the really basic things that you people generally do in terms of just your regular maintenance. You actually get very familiar with your snowmobile. So I would not consider myself like a gearhead by any means. But a lot of this stuff just exists, and over time, like, you can rely on your snowmobiling buddies that have been there, done that. And again, like, the people are out there, and they're definitely willing to share.
Cool.
Um, Sled rentals is another great way. It's not cheap, but there are you can go on to Craigslist. Oftentimes, I think Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, there will be people that will the further you have to haul it, the cheaper it is yourself. If you're picking up a sled, a mountain sled and you're going to meet them at Vail Pass, like, expect to be spending a little bit more top dollar. Whereas if you have a truck and a trailer and you can just go pick it up at their place, that somebody, you can oftentimes get it for cheaper. But at the same time, like, be prepared too, like, especially if you're not familiar with the zone. If you get stuck or lost, it costs a lot of money, and expect to spend days. And so I honestly think when it comes to renting a sled, if you're going with a group that has snowmobiles, your odds of being able to get it back out and unscathed is a lot higher. Transportation, trailers, easiest way you could, if you don't have a truck that has a bed, you can definitely still transport them. I think the biggest thing to remember is don't get tiny wheels. Those things, if you get going down the highway, a 50 mile per hour, 60 mile per hour, those tiny little wheels, and I'm talking like, those like 10-inch, 12-inch wheels, they're going like, that's the equivalent of them going like 120, 200, 200 miles per hour. Like, they're not going to last. And so if you do get those, like, one place, two place trailers, make sure you get a properly highway sized trailer, like, or wheel 14, 15 minimum. And so, yeah. And so, be careful, stay within the towing limits. I have towed two places with, with a Subaru WRX, and it did fine. Probably was pushing the tow limits, but whatever. Enclosed trailers, the kind of the completely covered ones, those are always great, but they are, a little bit more pricey. They can be a little bit sketchy when it comes to wind too. And yeah, sled decks like the one that you see in the picture there. That's kind of one of the easier things. They can be the scariest thing about them is you are practically 4 or 5 feet off the deck. Like, and I think, like, if you're on Instagram or TikTok or whatever, like, man, they love to show footage of people, fucking that up and going full send, like gapping the truck and stuff like that. It doesn't happen often. Let's just say, like I've almost only exclusively had a sled deck for the last 10 years, and I've only really like missed the track like 3 or 4 times, and it just resulted in a relatively uneventful, just kind of fell off, just kind of tipped over, and just had to like jump off of it real quick, just to avoid it. So it does happen. It is sketchy, even though I've probably gone up and down my sled deck like hundreds of times. It still makes me a little bit nervous, sending it up that deck the initial time. So if you can get used to that, I think the sled deck is one of the best things. And if you go to places like Vail Pass where they have pretty limited parking, there are, if the for the Wyoming folk out there, you all know that that pass that goes from Driggs to God dang it, I'm forgetting the name of that pass, but it goes from like Driggs to Jackson. They do not allow trailers. So sometimes sled deck are your only option. They're better to park. You can park in regular spots. Drop the sled and go park it in a regular spot. You can, it doesn't. You don't have to have like a teardrop to turn the entire thing around. Especially some of these like multi-axle, 5-place enclosed trailers, like even unenclosed trailers. It's a huge turning radius. So there's definitely pros and cons to having sled decks versus trailers. Easy option too is just truck bed it. Just toss it in the truck bed. Downside to a truck bed is everything's still exposed. Everything that you put in the bed. Whereas on a sled deck, you can still actually use it for storage. Making sure you tie down those things is very important. Don't ever run. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor here, but there's a lot of these little holes on the rail, and it's important to never run your nylon through that or have it leaning and tension on it. I usually use snow or sorry, not snow, dirt bike and motorcycle tie downs, and I'll clip it to these rails and then I'll tie it to there when I use the sled deck. But if you run nylon across this, the second you hit like a speed bump or something like that, it's gonna just get cut. And I've seen it happen a lot, and so it's something to keep in mind. Always metal to metal when it comes to where you attach your where you attach and tie down your how you secure your sled. One last thing too is in most places mid-season, like you don't always need a ramp. There you can really just back it up into a snowbank and just plan on it. It just definitely sucks when you show up to something like a place like that, and that snowbank that you usually loaded your snowmobile up on just got plowed through by the people that were maintaining it. And then you end up having to, load it up on some sketchy ass like bank. So it usually is best to have a ramp of some sorts to get it up and down on your own, or you can borrow a friend's. Do that a lot. All right, preparing to ride. This is more on the gear type stuff. So there's a few different types of ski racks. What you see here in the photo, these are like side mounts. They come in all sorts of different sizes and different configurations. I think the Ski-Doo ones have some for the link rails now. I mean, they're not cheap; they're like 500-600 bucks. But these are side mounted. This particular one in the photo that you see, that's essentially just drilled into the tunnel, into the side of the tunnel, and just bolted and mounted there. I think this particular one was like 150 bucks or so. The downside with these side mount ones are that, if you look at this, your running board, is my cursor showing, by the way? I don't know if it is or not. I don't know if you guys can see it or not. But
Yeah, I
anyway,
can see it.
okay, good, good.
Let me
Because
see.
like if you look here, like this effectively is taking up a lot of your running board. And as I get into some of like the riding basics or riding, with partners and stuff like that, this section right here is it's kind of important that you can use that. If you look at this down here too, you see the strap just kind of dangling right here. Imagine if this thing was not strapped in, which, pro tip, always strap in your buckles when sled skiing. That amount of vibration has a tendency to lose straps very fast. And so if that strap just got underneath and just got sucked into your track here, goodbye strap, hope you brought a bunch of belay straps. And if you go to our backcountry 101 clinics, those belay straps are clutch. And I've had to do this a many of times because no matter how many times I tell people strap your straps down before you put it on the sled, it doesn't always happen. And people lose straps like all the time. So this is what's considered a side mount. They are one of the most important things with these things is never roll. If you're rolling the sled to get it unstuck, always take the snowboard or or skis off. They will snap these points. This most of the time these are made out of plastic. If they're not made out of plastic, they're made out of metal. And if they're made out of metal, that means it's going to bend your tunnel. Like it's so much leverage on these tunnels, and these tunnels are typically like stamped aluminum, so they're not exactly the earliest tunnels ever. So it's very important that you always take these things off if you're going to roll it and use it to get unstuck, which is a very common thing to do, particularly with two strokes. And so a top mount, I used to, this is a part where let me see if I have an example of that. This is a top mount. So this is where this particular one is from Backcountry United. It's this local guy here makes these sleds, and I don't see too many that are like that do have this top mounted kind of aside from Backcountry United. Most companies are side mounted ones. I personally like these top mounted ones because look at how much space is on you pretty much have your entire running board to use, and yeah, so this is my preferred method on these. It is okay that if you roll your sled and roll it over, because like it's just the leverage goes straight down versus really just torquing the heck out of these points. So this particular one, again, this is that's a top mount versus a side mount. Tunnel bags is a huge factor as well. Most oftentimes the side mount ones do come with like these different types of bags that go in here. You can kind of see one there. And for mine, this on this Polaris, there was storage up here. There was storage underneath the seat as well. But currently, I do have a setup that has like an extended box here. But again, when it comes to having gear, one of the beautiful things about having a sled is you can bring a lot more stuff onto with your sled. So it is an important thing to kind of to keep in mind with where and what you can store too. Side mount is rarely kind of by schedule, if you will. You can't really go back and forth between skis and snowboards. This strap right here, I have seen some that have like a buckle down here for skis and then a buckle up here for snowboards. But top mounts, you can put more. All you have to do is just open up some skis and just slap them on there. So there's definitely pros and cons. The main top mount mainly being it's a little bit more versatile. You can, probably roll it. You have a better time actually snowmobiling on it. But the side mounts, you probably have more space in the tunnel bag because you can have a tunnel bag on there. All right, tow rope systems. There's two basic types of tow ropes. There's wake towing. This person back here this is most likely getting towed into a feature or something like that, that kind of ski joring type kind of thing. And this is the one that I got from Lou Dawson, and this is what I prefer is the Dawson method. Now the wake tow, and you're essentially just using just a wakeboard. And I've seen some people just tie a stick. You just buy a wakeboarding thing. But if you're going more than 2 miles miles on relatively, it's going, unless you've been, working out your arms, like it is work because you are really holding on to that thing. I mean, once you get into the zone and maybe it's just, a quick 500 foot, straight up to get to the next spot to do your drop. Yeah, sure. Maybe it's not worth it to set up this, the what I call the Lou Dawson method. It is, that's where I got it from. Lou Dawson a guidebook author. He's kind of an OG when it comes to Colorado backcountry. Um, and so, anyways, like the benefit of the wake toe is it's great for these short range, just quick, let me just pull from here to there. Like heck, if you're in the parking lot, like there's no point, and you're just getting to from point A to point B, just dragging somebody along, like this is the way to do it. And oftentimes too, you can be really efficient with this. You can have knots tied along your tow rope, get run it out super long and get five people, especially if you're on some plowed road. Now, the way that I prefer to do, because even at Vail Pass, from I-70 to Ptarmigan Hill, which is kind of the prominent the sled skiing area, that's a 1.5, 2 mile haul. Even with that, I will still do this, what I call the Lou Dawson. So this on the left here, this is a bike tube. Definitely cut the valve off of them. I'll just go to like REI or any bike shop and just ask them for some blown tubes. And again, cut the valve stem off of them because it'll be very uncomfortable getting those things pressed into you. And I usually will double up. And by double up, I mean just folding it a half around your waist, and it should sit really snug. It shouldn't be like uncomfortably snug, like where you feel like your gut's gonna like choke out. But if you just take a carabiner, wrap clip it onto the hole and just wrap it all the way around your stomach, then and clip it on, then again between a 29-inch and a 26-inch and 27.5-inch mountain bike tubes, you can fit most people's waist sizes. And if not, you can run them single. Not the best grade suit. If you do run it single with somebody that's like XXL, definitely double up on it. But the concept of this is really, really simple. It's essentially setting up a 3 to 1. If anybody's knows climbing terminology there, you just tie a bight into the rope. You hang a beaner. I would not use this type of thing because a link, because this has the tendency to actually get it stuck. I just use another carabiner right here. Just an oval is totally fine. No need to get fancy into lockers or anything like that. But just an oval or a pear shaped carabiner. Heck, get a Steely from Home Depot for $5. They don't have to be aluminum grade, lightweight, freaking 20 kilonewton rated climbing beaners by any means. They can be just some dirt cheap ones that you get from Home Depot. But I think it's helpful to have these. And so what it is you tie this run. Should be about a full arm's length between the knot to the end, and then you run it through the open end. You run it through your waist, and then you run it back through here, and then you just hold on to the end there. Don't hold on to anything else. And it does not take, because you've set up a 3 to 1, it does not take a lot to hold on to this. It doesn't whip out like when you do like a wake. This is essentially a 1 to 1 system. The amount of force that's coming out of there is the amount of force that's going into your hands. Whereas with this, I forgot what the mechanical advantage of it is, but it's great enough to make it you do not have to hold on very tight. And if the distance between here is relatively short, so you don't want this to be like 3-4 feet in front of you. If it's just like 1 or 2 feet in front of you, and this is just held up right here, and you're just barely holding on to this, and this is where having good leather gloves is super helpful. Just better traction on it, and you just hold on to it. And then the benefit of this is, okay, if anything happens, you just let go of it. if you catch an edge and you just totally eat it, like it will just pull out and release itself. Oftentimes, like the worst thing you can, if you do set this up, always give people a little bit of a clinic on how this works at the trailhead, because invariably somebody thinks that you're supposed to clip this to that. That's a good way to pretty much mess up somebody's season for the rest of for the rest of the year, because they're essentially going to get dragged if they don't. Now, towing itself is a very it takes a little bit of skill. I think I actually have a whole section on that particularly a little bit later, but I'll just focus on kind of the mechanics of this right now. Well, you know what? I might as well jump to it now because I'd rather while it's kind of fresh. But the key to towing is tension. Is there should always be tension in the tow rope. If there's not tension in the tow rope, that either means you've gone in front, that the rider is outpacing the snowmobile, and that is a problem because it can the tow rope can get underneath and into the track, and if it gets sucked into the track, believe me, it's a terrible thing to do and to get to untangle. Tension means you stay behind and you're keeping a safe distance. Also, tension too, especially on acceleration, deceleration, is important because if there's ever slack, the second the snowmobile picks up, it's going to jerk you. And even with the Lou Dawson, even with the this giving you a little bit of pull, it still will lead to these swings in terms of acceleration and deceleration, that it just becomes a rougher ride. So as the person being towed, it's always good to just kind of back up, get tension before the snowmobile even starts to go. It is, and then it becomes a dance. I find myself hitting the brakes really hard if I see the snowmobile, if I see the snowmobile coming up on something that requires braking, I will preemptively hit the brakes on the snowboard just to keep that tension, and that I don't go blowing past the snowmobile. And so it's as tempting as it is to just kind of lay back and ride, crack open a beer or whatever, when you're, especially when in this scenario in the Lou Dawson, it is very relaxing back there, especially on a groomed road, on a groomed trail. But pay attention to the snowmobiler. And if you are the one driving, be aware that somebody is towing behind you at all times. Don't accelerate just right off the bat and just jerk them, and because every time you turn around, every time you're trying to back up, that's one opportunity for you to get stuck. It's something it's just more and more increasingly challenging. They might, you might have lost somebody a long time ago, and so making sure you check in on people, and just seeing how comfortable they are back there. I generally speaking think that 15 to 20 miles per hour is probably the fastest you want to be going. Anything faster than that is kind of scary in the back, especially if there's any whoops or any, like whoops being bumps and stuff like that. So and again, I think I have a whole nother section on towing, but for the sake of the setup, these are the two main types of towing. And again, I'll get to like rope lengths and stuff like that too, because it does make a huge difference. What to pack? You're going out in the backcountry. I'm not going to spend a crazy amount of time on this. You can actually download this, but I will highlight a few of the things that I use the most often. Toilet paper, number one. I use it all the time. So having a way, for leave no trace, having enough enough bags to pack pack your poo out, definitely, is helpful. That's what I use the most. First aid is probably the next. In terms of just small things from cuts to more serious things. Obviously food and stuff like that. But I would say, take your everything that you would take on a full day. even potentially a multi-day trip when it comes to what you think, because you can pack stuff onto the snowmobile. Multiple goggles, I think, is the most important thing. You fog up a lot when it comes to heat, and with the snowmobile generating tons of heat, I usually carry three different lenses, and I always carry a pair of clear lenses because it just is, especially on those big days, trying to get out on a snowmobile, whether you're towed or not, is a pain in the ass without clear lenses. And again, snowmobiles get you out there. I usually carry four pairs of gloves as well. Because when you're between taking your gloves on and off with stuff mobiling, again, you're just talking more and more moisture. I've yet to come across a pair of gloves that just do stay absolutely completely dry. And then I just have an emergency pair of like -25, gloves that just stay in my pack for those days that we're out super late. So those are kind of the main ones. Tools, again, don't skimp on tools. You'd be surprised on kind of what all the different scenarios and different types of things that and of repairs that you have to be prepared for. I do carry duct tape as well. That's a quick and easy way to kind of get out of it. So this is, almost forgot I had this particular one. This is with snowmobiling. So what's different from your backcountry pack that you're going to go take to go ride, but with snowmobiling in itself, right? These slings for getting yourself unstuck is huge. It'll, your back will, just to be able to girth hitch it, which is, just running it through, and to the ski loops or the bumper as you're pulling somebody out. It happened, again, stuck, was the first inevitable. You're going to get stuck a lot. And one of the best ways to get unstuck is have a buddy, pull your ski, call them ski poles, and yeah, so having these things to be able to do that is huge. And just as an emergency, when it comes to first response, first aid, that type of stuff. So tow cable, obviously you can just use the same rope that you have, but I actually do carry a specific set of it's a nylon, and it's for towing disabled sleds out. It has specific hooks, and to because it just happens often, that a snowmobile just gets breaks down and is just stuck, and even if you have somebody else that just meet somebody else out there, or having your buddies like tow the sled back to the truck, it's really helpful to have it in addition to your tow rope kit. Jumping back to tow ropes, by the way, honestly, anything that's is static or dynamic, as long as it's kind of like it's look climbing rope esque, is fine. Spent rope, if you are a climber and you need to retire some rope, that's often really good to just use that. A saw. I carry like a chainsaw. Mine is not actually more like this one, the one that you see here. This is kind of like serrated. But like this, the one that I have is very similar. I've taken down 10-inch trees. If you fork a tree, for example, or you get rolled into a group of trees, unless you've got like 10 people and you can pull that thing back uphill, sometimes it's best to just take down a tree, and go plant one later to save the earth and all that stuff. But anyways, like, sometimes it is best to just cut that tree down. Having a small folding saw or something that, even for your snow study kits, but oftentimes those like small, like 6 to 8 inch or even 10-inch blades, like a folding one, just cut off the branches and stuff like that, go a long way. And then using these kind of chainsaw types, to take down like bigger trees, super helpful. Again, 2+ pairs. I already talked about this when it comes to gloves and goggles. Again, you're dealing with heat. So yeah, I personally have a little torch too. And this has helped tremendously when it comes to doing field repairs. Sometimes when you've got an engine bay that's completely packed full of snow, you're just like, it is so difficult to work on that. And to just fire up a little butane torch and just to clear out the area that you're working with just goes a huge way in your hands getting cold, losing screws and just trying to deal with trying to fix a sled and deal with snow at the same time. Not to mention if, let's say, I've used these things to soften up plastic on skis because skis, if you hit a rock or hit a tree, like, and I'm talking about my snowmobile skis, not my skis, but if your sled's skis, they get mangled and murked all the time. They have a torch to be able to like bend that thing back into shape, potentially punch a new hole into it if you need to. Just a lot of it goes a huge way. And even to using it as let's say you lost your coolant cap or your oil cap, and somewhere in the trail, you just topped off your oil, you forgot to put the cap back on super tight, and all of a sudden you saw that you're dripping oil at the next stop. To be able to take the duct tape and use that to heat it up just soft enough to that it's going to stick. That's the difference between saving an entire day versus hauling it because you've got oil everywhere. One thing that I didn't put in here is a bunch. Speaking of like spilled oil and stuff like that, is I usually do carry like 2 or 3 rags in a Ziploc bag to clean stuff just in case. Because if you do get some oil onto your clutch, it's going to throw off the way that your clutch handles, especially some of the newer sleds and the older sleds too, and it'll over rev and it'll throw signals to your snowmobile that are not very fun. And it'll kick your snowmobile into a limp home mode, which is essentially it won't let you rev past like 1500 because it's afraid that you're going to blow up your engine if you don't. And so being able to like clean that off and even some sort of a small like travel pack worth of some sort of solvent or degreaser, that's been what I've been wanting to add in there just because it goes a long way in terms of your ability to repair and address things in the field. Honestly too, even as survival, all this stuff that I mentioned is really helpful when it comes to survival too. First aid kit.
So first, we got another question real quick from Curtis, I believe. What type of slings do you use, and are they climbing slings or more heavy duty ones?
Climbing slings or heavy duty ones. I personally like the Dyneema runners. They're just small. I carry 2 different sizes. I usually have just like 20s and 40s. Like just single length or and even a quad length. It didn't doesn't take up too much space, and I actually keep it in my pocket because I'm helping people get unstuck often. And yeah, and the climbing slings are relatively cheap too. I think you can get a single length for $15 from a climbing store. Yeah, and they're built pretty sturdy. But I ought to be honest, if you just get a nylon sling from, you know, I don't honestly, I've never really seen like those types of slings at Home Depot unless you kind of like tie them off yourself and loop them yourself. But yeah, I honestly like I think climbing slings are more than enough, and they are compact too, which is kind of nice.
Well, awesome.
Um, let's see. First aid. This is a general statement with all my backcountry. I've used my first aid training more than I've used my avalanche rescue training, by probably fivefold, maybe even more. Just because, if you're smart about avalanches, you're not in them often. But the thing is first aid stuff just seems to just happen. People hit trees, people, lacerate themselves on this or that. Dislocated shoulders. I've had to set you know, three or four of them and being out in the backcountry, dealing, yeah, like dealing with lacerations, all this stuff. And the good thing about all this is it's relatively, it's not, you don't need like a 10-day kit, right? You can just have like a 1 day last kit. Thank God I've never had to do CPR in the backcountry, knock on wood too. But that is stuff that you should be ready for. And again, so I think last minor first aid, this is training that is some of the best spent training that you will ever have is in first aid training. I don't think a woofer is totally necessary. That I think it's like a 10-day commitment. I don't know many people that have that kind of time to be able to spend on it. And they spend a lot of time on talking about like, oh, if you make a call, this is like how you're supposed to report it. Like this is, this is very, very in-depth kind of thing. Whereas like a first aid kit, where 1 week, two, I think there are only like 2 or 3 days, is probably sufficient for what y'all need. But again, I cannot emphasize the importance. Back to that whole you're your own ski patrol out there, and it's going to take a while for you to get out there. Um, Basics of avalanche rescue gear: beacon, shovel, probe, 3 channel beacon. We're in this day and age, there's no excuse to have anything less than a three antenna. It just no excuse. I've heard some horror stories with 2 antennas, and I honestly think all manufacturers should do the world a favor and just retire anything that's 2 antenna. They just simply should not exist out there. And if you're not familiar with what a 3 antenna and 2 antenna is, again, I'm not going to spend too much time on the avalanche stuff because honestly, an avalanche awareness course or just taking your AV one is probably better. But this is one of those that I'm kind of like, I have to advocate that like, just don't. Shovels. I actually carry 2 shovels. I usually carry a huge transfer shovel. They look like these giant jump building shovels. Let me see if I have a picture of one of them. Uh, I don't think I have it in here yet. Well, it's a huge. They're called these bully shovels. They're like this single plastic injection molded. They're just massive things. Great to have on. Like in terms of getting unstuck, having a good shovel is super super helpful. Good. I'm even with regards to rescue, not even talking about stuck mobiling, but having a big blade. I personally just don't know why you would want to try to shave weight on a shovel or a probe. I mean, it's just not it just makes zero sense to me why you would try to look at that area. So get something with a decent sized blade, extendable handle, a hoe mode, all of that. Anything that you invest in your shovel is good. You're going to use your shovel more to dig your sled out, hopefully, than you do, any other, and then anything else. So consider that when it comes to picking a shovel. Yeah, the radios too, even though it's technically not exactly rescue gear, I think it is so, so, so crucially important, especially with snowmobiling. Because, we're just getting to, tell people where you are at, trying to, it takes all but like 5 minutes to be like a mile or two apart, when it comes to you just all of a sudden when you're snowmobiling you're just so far away from people. If you're on one of the newer sleds, I think they came out 2 or 3 years ago, but they actually talk to each other and you can see where your friends are. Unfortunately, it's brand specific. Like Polaris only talks to Polaris and Dews only talk to Dews. But I think it's only a matter of time before it just becomes like you can track it. But a radio is super super important. And with how much movement that you do between getting on and off the sled, between all your gear, handling all of that stuff, those channels change. And on the BCA ones, you have like, I think it was 6 different settings. I actually keep 1 to 3 on the exact same channel, and then 4 to 6 on the exact same channel as well, like a different channel. So that way, if it gets bumped, which it does often, like you don't completely lose it out. If you read, um, well, not actually, I don't think he was talking about airbags. Anyways, airbags, I think it's an important rescue piece because all of this above here, minus the radio, this is you're relying on your partner to know how to use this, right? The airbag is the only piece, unless you're still use an Avalon, which if you can still find them, I encourage them, are the only pieces that you can use on that. That's totally on you to deploy and use. The rest of them is on your partner. So this is, airbag and Avalon are the only things that you have to control. So, that's something to consider. Speaking of radios, I personally, I've got I have an Oxbow one. I've heard decent things about Rocky Talkies as well. The BCA ones are pretty good too. I've had some challenges with some of the durability of some of the linkages, but I think they've got by and large that mostly fixed. And I think that they're super, super helpful. Honestly, when it comes to the SATCOM kind of like things, it's more for letting my partner know that I'm going to be late and don't wait for me for dinner. Luckily, I've never had to use it for the emergency piece, but man, it's definitely saved my relationship from being like, I'm in an epic, nothing's wrong, like I will be home, but it might be a late one, and just being able to send that text to my wife is been it is, let's just say, it saved a many of arguments. So I personally have just a InReach Mini, but they all practically do a very similar thing, and just to be able to have an SOS too. I've heard that the iPhones have started to have the SATCOM abilities, and I don't know. I have not heard much in terms of the reliability of them, whether or not they are any better or worse than a independent device for it. Be kind of curious if anybody has any. Okay, here's getting into the writing stuff. Um, Riding, the riding basics. And this is just, again, strictly snowmobiling stuff. So there's this, I would say there's kind of 3 different levels of riding. Trail riding, which is, and when I say trail riding, I do not mean like this is a summer road. Because what a summer road in the wintertime is practically just a one-dimensional field. Like if it's not plowed, like you almost have to treat it as off trail. And it can be really challenging. Like, I honestly think that snowmobiling is like when you go from a groomed trail to off trail is like just going from a green, perhaps even the bunny hill, to a double black like instantly. Like the amount of skill required to ride off trail with regards to throttle control, with regards to balance, everything it just exponentially expands in that split second that you go off trail. When I'm letting people ride the snowmobile back down, on after we've gotten dropped off, I'm usually just absolutely stay on the trail, and just if and I will wait up on top for them to get down and then radio up, all right, I'm at the pickup spot. Because if they get stuck, you can still ride down to them. If you're antsy and you go ride down and they get stuck up above you, you gotta hike to them, and hopefully they can get themselves unstuck. So I think that that's, generally speaking, beginners, anybody that's new to snowmobiling, just make sure they stay on trail no matter what. It's really simple. You just it's easy. You just, like I said in the slide here, you just throttle and go, and you're pretty much you can if you can can figure it out. The steering is very, very responsive on a groomed trail. The only thing I think that's really needs to be in consideration when it comes to riding on trail, in especially with mountain sleds, is they're really tippy. They're really balancy. Like you need to stay on the high side. So what I mean by high side, like imagine you're cutting across something like this. If I were riding across the trail like this and it's slanted downward, I need to be on top, on the upper side of it, and potentially even just being on one of the running boards, all my weight completely on that side, and just being able to read the road. Because like I said, even these summer roads that get snowed in as they put it in, you will see that they start to like kind of cant, they kind of slant to one side. And if you don't get on the high side, even if it's just one person, the likelihood of that sled tipping over is really, really high. So it is really, really, really important to always stay on the high side of the trail. Off trail, this is when you're starting to get into more intermediate level riding. And I think that this is, if you plan on going anywhere that is not groomed, that isn't a groomed road, spending a little bit of time learning how to ride off trail is super, super helpful. Whether it's just in some lake, I know somebody just, was had gone up to Jones. And once you've cleared, once you get into the Alpine there, and if you take that road all the way up, there will be like there's a lake up there. It's a really small lake, but it freezes over really fast, and it's a nice flat spot to learn and to practice how to one ski, and how and by one ski, it's a counter steer throttle. It's almost like riding a wheelie on a bicycle, just giving it a little bit of speed, a lot of lean, and you get it onto one ski, you straighten it out, and then you just practice holding that one ski. I think I learned to one ski on groomed trails too, just as you're cruising along, just kick it on, counter steer, lean into it, put it up on one ski, just practice holding that one ski. And just, and if you're ever in doubt, you just, turn into it and it'll just straighten itself out, or you just put your weight back over center. And that one ski is the foundation for learning to turn in powder, learn and learning to turn your snowmobile around. If you get downhill, if you're going downhill and you're getting into a little bit of a situation where you have to pull yourself out of it, which happens a lot. These are machines. It's a 500-pound machine. It's going to naturally want to just go downhill. So you're going to oftentimes end up in these areas where you're downhill. And to be able to turn up and to be able to climb and get out of that, it's not something that you can just be like, oh, okay, I'm just going to turn around. Like if you can't one ski, get onto one ski and turn it up. And so practicing just doing circles on a flat field on one ski, in both directions, that's essentially how to get from, to like intermediate level snowmobile riding, where, again, it's from good. And so if you look at this in terms of order of skill to learn, to one foot, to essentially just be able to be on one foot on the running board, one foot off, and then, turn, counter steer, and then lean into it. And then to be able to use that just to walk a circle, before you even go with 2 feet on, where you're straddling the sled in a normal riding position, will teach you the mechanics of how to get onto one ski. Once you're on one ski, you can do it on one foot, and then you learn to do it with 2 feet. Just again, riding the sled and learning to ride that balance. And once you've done that, you've ventured into powder turns. This is where the second inevitable starts to just, will put a freaking grin on your face the size of Texas. This is because once you're starting to make these powder turns and you're turning like you are snowboarding or skiing in a flat field with 3 feet of pow, and that's when you really realize like the potential that snowmobiling has with regards to just enjoying pow and learning. I mean, it's just like snowboarding, like skiing. You got to learn to turn, and in order to learn to ride, and that's the exact same when it comes to snowmobiling. And then once you are able to make these little turns, then you get yourself into being able to turn up again if you're going down a hill, and then being able to turn yourself up and then climb out of that. High marking, this is probably the easiest thing to do, but it's kind of scary to do too. And it's probably the riskiest thing to do too, is where you're essentially just pitting it up a hill and then just turn yourself down. Again, if you learn to stay on your high side. So it would be like in terms of intermediate skills, it's 1 foot. On one ski, 2 foot on one ski, then you can learn to do powder turns. And once you've learned to do powder turns, you can do turn ups, high marking. Now, advanced stuff like what I'm doing over here with like doing a reentry, that's when things just, that's when you start to just get have become stupid fun with snowmobiling, and it's just some fun things to be able to do, have a tiny little feature, just all of a sudden just turn that into, it's almost like riding in the park again, just turning it a tiny little rail or a box, and just doing just crazy sessions on it, just having a lot of fun, getting stuck a lot, just watching your buddies and just, having a good old time and on in the snow. That's when things really start to, you've officially transferred over to the dark side when you are starting to do reentries and turn downs and stuff. But the basics when it comes to sled skiing, trail riding, and when it comes to, if you're, like I said, if you're trying to use your sled to get into access, learning this off trail stuff goes a long way. Even if you are planning on doing mostly trail riding and mostly toe in type stuff, having off trail skills for that inevitable time that snowmobile gets off trail, and being able to get it out of that situation without just saying, okay, is there a trail below me that I can just point it down to? Like it's the difference between, again, a good day in the backcountry versus like a complete epic because somebody got their sled stuck on the downhill side of a groomed trail, and you can't go back up. If you don't know how to turn up, you don't know how to ride one ski in the powder, it's really, really difficult to get yourself out of that situation. You're essentially digging yourself out of that situation, having to pound down a pad for you to get out. Now imagine that versus just get the most competent snowmobiler to just wrap it right back up onto the trail. A 1 hour epic just turned into a 2 minute, adjustment, and you can get back onto your day sled skiing. All right, snowmobiling basics. Let's take it back even one more notch. I believe strongly, finger on the brake, always, 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 always. There's two reasons for this. One is, you just have to, using your brake is extremely important. And number two is when you set an emergency brake, usually by you release that emergency brake by by squeezing the brake lever. So if for whatever reason somebody accidentally set the emergency brake on, and by the way, emergency brakes, overheating your brakes by somebody setting an emergency brake and not taking off is probably the number one reason snowmobiles catch fire. And I've seen, probably 4 or 5 snowmobiles, on fire because I'm like, oh, I know exactly what happened. Somebody threw on the emergency brake and they didn't freaking let it go. And I've had to run people down and be like, yo, you stop, stop, stop. Your sled's on fire. And that's why I always tell people to put the finger on the brake, never, and use it, because in that case that it did get set, you would at least unset it. If you're more into intermediate, in the snow, into powder turns and stuff like that. You can actually engage into your one ski by just tapping on your brake. It's a little bit more of like an intermediate powder riding skill, but it is something that is very helpful versus trying to gas into it. And sometimes you just don't have time, space to gas, and you can just slap it into brake, put it on one ski, and turn it up. Know where the reverse is. This is one of the things when I before I leave the trailhead, and I show people, show the crew that I'm with, this is how the Lou Dawson, this is how you tow. Make sure you keep tension. When I do the quick, the quick 5 minute rundown of the sled, it's like, all right, everybody go take this thing for a spin and make sure you know how to put it in reverse. Sometimes people, it's not intuitive. Like when you throw a two stroke into reverse, it is not another gear. It is literally running your engine backwards. And so it will stop the engine and start it back up going in the other direction. And sometimes that throws people off. They're like, oh, like, and if you hit reverse and sometimes it just shuts the engine off, people are like, and then you just kind of, hit the throttle again, thinking that your engine's about to die. You will kick it out of that sequence, and it'll keep it in forward. And so sometimes people don't understand that that's how a two-stroke engine reverse works. And so that's what I mean by, know where the reverse is, and a two-stroke will stop the engine. And so ride with a tether. A tether is a kill switch that if the rider, the driver of the sled gets, removed from the snowmobile, it'll just shut the engine off right away. And this is important for two reasons. One, like if you get detached from your snowmobile and it's still running, it actually, your idle is, technically still putting gas, and you're still running your throttle. And so it'll get away from you further. Whereas if it just stops, it just pretty much just kills everything and it just comes sliding to a halt. Versus your track is still engaged. If you're going downhill, like that's how you ghost the sled, and have it just disappear downhill on you. And that's why I think it's very important to ride with the tether, and that tether is attached to you. Remember, these things are single variable transmission. That means there's no gears, but it goes from, zero to, imagine, first gear to fifth gear in a matter of like, as fast as you can squeeze the trigger, or hold down the throttle. That's what makes it fun. But at the same time, like that's what makes these things really tricky to learn to ride on. And again, like this is one reason I think a lot of new, again, the people that you're with, the crew that you're riding with, that are not familiar with their sled, so important for them to just take a lap around the parking lot to get used to that throttle feel. Because I've seen so many people just whiskey throttle it. That means like, hit the throttle thinking that it's going to be like a car, and it just takes off on them. And then the sled just goes flying into the trees because they had no idea how much power goes into the engine, and your transmission just goes from zero to hero in a snap of a finger, literally, the pinch of a finger. It goes. And so having your entire crew be familiar with how your throttle works, super, super important. Again, I can't emphasize enough the importance of learning to stay on the high side, especially when you're starting to two up, which I'll get to. And then the last thing with the basics is always, 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 always keep an eye on your temperature. Most modern sleds have some form of reading the temperature. Anything like 2000s and above has some form of temperature gauge, whether it's an actual temperature, here's the digital thing, whether it's a bar, something like that. Like there is something that's going to tell you what your engine temperature is at. Now, the reason that's important, especially with mountain sleds and with two strokes, is one, you can blow an engine if you run at 190 or 200, like for too long at wide open, just going on wide open throttle for a few seconds at 200 will blow an engine. Can at least. Been there, done that. So don't do it. Learn from me. It's an expensive mistake. And so, there's a few ways that you can keep your temperature down, especially when you're towing. These mountain sleds are meant to be ridden with one person riding through deep snow. So keep that in mind when you're putting more people onto a sled. If you're two-upping on a sled, you're essentially riding this thing like it's not in a way that it wasn't designed to be ridden. And part of that is the temperature control. Scratchers, which are, these rails that are, let me see if I have an example of a scratcher. Right here, down here. This is a wire scratcher. I do not recommend these cable scratchers. They completely suck unless you have like three or four of them down, But they were originally created. They're nice because you can go and reverse in them and they won't just break off. But nowadays, like you can put on reversible scratchers. I think even Ski-Doo has had reversible scratchers that are like, wire cable scratchers. And what scratchers do is they kick snow up into your track, and then that snow gets pushed into your tunnel, and there's coolant that runs through your tunnel. So in Polaris's it only goes like to here, but in Ski-Doos they go like the full length. I have a whole nother slide on that. But anyways, like and so it not only kicks snow into and it keeps it cool. Again, that's why a snow flap is super helpful. But it also lubes your rails. It keeps all of this lubed up, and so that way, like as you're running through it, again, it's just important to keep your scratchers down, and it helps to regulate temperature. You can ride through some fresh snow if you're comfortable. Sometimes if I'm pushing 170, 180, and then I'm like, oh, there's a patch of fresh snow right there. Sometimes I'll just take everybody through it and then just be like, hey, anybody that's getting towed, like hold on, or I'll just have everybody get off, just do a quick loop. And it's insane how quickly those will go from 180 to 120, 130 in just a matter of seconds of just making a couple pow turns through some fresh snow. Having a snow flap helps with that too because it keeps the snow in there. And there's other ways. I have actually a whole two slides on keeping temperature down when it comes to the basics. So I'll get on that. But again, finger on the brake, know where the reverse is, ride with the tether, know how to start and stop it. Those are things that every single time if I go out with somebody who's brand new and because you want to ride with a group if you're sled skiing, having two peoples per sled is not uncommon, and it's not uncommon that people don't know much about snowmobiling. So it's up to y'all to teach them and also to make sure that they keep an eye on the temperature too, because going slow is actually not what these things are designed to do too. Two-upping and just getting multiple people up a sled. Canadian is literally side by side. So let's just imagine, Nate over here, and I forgot who that was, but we'll just, orange and blue. That's what Canadian is. Alaskan is one person in front and then the other person straddling in back, kind of like you would two up on a snow on a motorcycle. Chipmunk is three people or more, right? You have one person in the chipmunk seat. You kind of makes it look like you're kind of like eating a nut right there, not in a gross way, but like, yeah. And then the two people, it's like a combo of like, riding Canadian two up. Now, I think it's very important to remember it's a dance, especially when you're trying to stay on the high side, and getting, you to follow each other. If you have two people that are very experienced snowmobilers, it's almost just like natural. But if somebody is not used to it, what I usually say is put your knee on, let's just say like this person in the blue is the less experienced one. I say, put your outside knee, even potentially your inside knee, just make sure it like touches the seat, right? So that way they keep their center of gravity close. I have them grab the grab bar here, not here, because they'll have a tendency to pull and want to steer, and then you'll end up kind of fighting the steering on that. And then be like, put your hand on my back, and if I lean, you lean. If I lean in, you lean out. Just dance with me, and then I'll have both of my hands on the steering, on the brake, and on the throttle, and I am essentially the one that's in control, and just this other person just has to follow my lead. And sometimes it's easier in those situations. Um, I think the side by side Canadian is sometimes harder with brand new beginners, that going Alaskan and either having the inexperienced person sit chipmunk and the more experienced person kind of like go over them. That's probably a more sure shot way to ensure that they're not, that they don't have to do anything. You're the one that's doing all the work with regards to leaning and so on and so forth. It's a little bit feels awkward because you're practically hovering on top of them. The other alternative is you being the more experienced driver, then the person behind just holds on to your backpack. Especially in more complex terrain when you actually need to do powder turns and really have to like pin the throttle to like get up something. That is oftentimes like the best way to manage, like two person hill climb, whether it's if it's side by side or if it's with a relatively inexperienced person, the person having them be directly behind you is actually the more easy thing to do, because they will naturally follow your lead. Whereas when you're side by side, they almost have to consciously follow your lead. So, and another thing to factor in is whether you're wearing ski boots, you're a skier or not. If you're a skier, it's so difficult to balance on this rail. You're just slipping and sliding, and you're just asking for, a bruised up knee, because you're going to take a running board to the shin quite often. And so I recommend, like, if you're a skier, go Alaskan. Again, that's stacked. And yeah, and then the most experienced driver should be the one on throttle, because they'll know when it's important to, you're approaching an uphill. You need to keep your speed at the uphill, otherwise you're going to get stuck. So the most experienced person always is the one that drives up. Having people drive a sled down, to the pickup spot is probably the easiest thing to do. But towing people back up is, always just, even if you're on tow, having the most experienced person ride uphill, drive the sled uphill, probably the single most important thing that you can do as a sled skier to avoid yourself getting stuck. Towing, back to towing, wear a face mask. Even when this, it kicks up a lot of snow. And if you're on, a packed track, that snow is really, really hard. It's like practically eating out of a blender, eating slushy out of a blender on high and just shove your face into it. So, I actually keep extra face masks in my car. And honestly, even a thin one is sufficient to, prevent your face from just getting murked. But no face mask is just, you're just asking for trouble. Like I said, keep tension. Brake, and that, I mean, well, this is for the rider. Brake when going downhill. It's inevitable. Like, you will see times where the snowmobile is starting to go downhill. Don't be tempted to ride past the sled. Like, slam on the brakes and just stay behind the sled and let it just kind of pull you down, because now you're going to be fighting this kind of like jerking motion. You're going to be fighting not getting the sled in, or the your rope underneath the track. And the worst possible thing that can happen is you lose your 3-1, and you get so close to it that it actually clips itself. It's never happened to me. I've never seen it happen, but I've heard that it can happen. And so again, keeping that tension in the system is really important. On an uphill, I mentioned up here, like, have verbal cues, right? And talk with for your person that you're two up and with. But it is important even to have cues, like, with the person on tow. I will do like the cut thing to be like, hey, you need to drop off the system because as you're going up a hill and you start to feel the sled start to bog, if they stay on and that track just cuts into the ground and you just pin it into the ground, that is a very difficult it's stuck. Or you would rather just have them cut off. You go up if you're doing what they're doing, riding Canadian here, have one person drop off, come back down, meet them back down at a flat spot and redo it with just one person on the sled versus trying to deal with the track that and then also you've essentially murked your track, your up track because you've just chainsawed in a 2 foot trench that now you have to build another, now you have to go around it. So, absolutely learn your sled, know when you're starting to go, and just the best thing to do is just stop, tell the person to cut. And if you have multiple people on, let's say, when I usually set up my rope tow, I have one that's a different length. So these people are not, so the people on tow aren't running into each other. And so the last person cuts first. So if I turn around and I say cut, you don't want the person that's ahead to all of a sudden cut and the next person doesn't, because guess what? You're taking them both down. Whereas if you establish that, hey, it's time to cut, you give them the cut signal, and the last person cuts, there's a chance that you can pull that first person out. And that one person was all that you needed to get past that little section before you started to trench. And so that, again, that's, having those signals for towing is super super important and just it's again it's the difference between having a good day and having a bad day because getting stuck like this, that is not what you want to do. So these were towing tips from the tower's perspective, right? Keep tension, brake. It's okay to ride the pow. Honestly, the person, you're not going, the snowmobile's barely going to feel it if you're like riding the side pow over here, as long as you keep tension, and know and keep an eye on the sled to wait, like, oh, we're about to hit this uphill section. Like, keep an eye on the driver. You also got to keep an eye on the person you're towing. If you lost them a mile back, that's not good. Constantly just be looking back. Don't get jerky, not in like the attitude sense, but just in the way you throttle. Like, as have a very gradual curve when it comes to your acceleration. So make it nice and slow, make it nice and smooth. Short rope versus long rope. Short ropes are good if you're going through like tight trees, because if you make a turn and you have a 50-foot long run of rope and you make a hard left turn, guess what? They're not going to follow you. They're going to go right into that tree. And so, knowing your terrain and how you've built that up track does determine how long of a rope that you want to use. A long rope is nice when you've got a nice, maybe it was a dirt road that got turned into a winter road that's groomed, and you've got 6, 7 miles. Like, you don't necessarily want to be, 10, 15 feet from the track, just eating slush, eating chunder the whole time. If you can have like a 20, 30 foot long run on rope just to get yourself away from the spray, give yourself a little bit more space to be back there, it's a lot more comfortable. And so as a driver, knowing when you're going to get stuck is huge. Like, throttling it out works most of the time. Stuck mobiling. Um, the more people, the better. The trying to get unstuck solo is really challenging. But most oftentimes, like, especially if you're in a snowmobiling situation where you're out snowmobiling, you're most oftentimes you're kind of on yourself until they can get to you. Um, track Having enough track is probably the most important thing. And so, what happens when a snowmobile gets stuck? Usually it's you don't have enough traction to keep your momentum going, that you need something to overcome that. right? And that's why a ski pole is super helpful because now you're not relying on the track. You're relying on somebody else to pull the ski and forward and out, right? Up and out, pulling it out and just put your whole weight into it, like full body weight. Think of it as like a full on squat, just pulling hard on it. One person can most of the time in a stuck situation will do it. Kicking out the running boards, clearing out the running boards with snow so that way the tunnel can drop. Again, it's all about how do you get traction onto the track? How can you remove friction? So clearing out snow from like say the front of the tunnel, like in this situation, I could probably have gotten out of it if you just stomp out the front right here. So that way the snowmobile just drops down. It gets out of the tunnel being completely stuck. And then just giving it a quick ski tug, a quick ski pole, having somebody else give a quick ski pole, you're out versus trying to like dig completely around this thing and then trying to, that's kind of like the beginner way versus the more intermediate way is doing the ski pole. If you are in like a more slanted situation, let's say you got stuck here, sometimes the rolling it, just grabbing the ski or the running board and rolling it over to reset your position is probably going to be a lot easier than trying to upright the snowmobile and trying to figure out a way to ski tug yourself out of it. So again, rolling it is not a bad option if the terrain allows for it, right? Um, Digging it, cutting it, dig it meaning just that is probably the most sure shot way. If you're just solo, you just dig out the running boards, you dig out the front underneath your sled, and most of the time that is sufficient for you to just pin it and wiggle it, like shake it side by side violently. Again, you're trying to get traction on, you're trying to get as much track as possible, and pinning and wiggling it, even though you're going to suck a hell of a lot of exhaust, it oftentimes goes a long way. If you're starting to feel any sort of movement at all and you can just shake it from side to side, like I'm seriously mean like, shake it violently, putting all your weight from one running board to the next, pulling and pushing on those handlebars, on as a solo to get it to just move a couple inches at a time. Oftentimes that's enough to just cut your way out of a stuck situation. But it's a very dangerous thing to do because if you're not moving barely an inch, you could just be sinking that track and just, making yourself having to restart it all over again. But again, back to the radio, the best thing to do is just radio to your buddies, say, hey, this is where I'm stuck at. Like more people power, the better. So this was from CFR. They are they made the side mounted racks over here. And I thought this was a kind of a pretty cool thing to just kind of a quick thing in terms of not overheating your sled. Again, you've spent a lot of money on the sled. The last thing that you want to do is blow it up when you're out there. Giving it time, um, you know, putting snow onto the track like this or on your tunnel. Again, remember there's coolant running through the tunnel, right? So having more snow impact hit that coolant and cooling down the sled, it goes a long way in terms of cooling your sled. This is the chainsaw. This is essentially being on one ski, turning it hard enough. You see how one ski is lifted off the ground there. You can even see his ski was kind of counter steered to get it, and then to drop it, and then to get it to the point, like tip it. Usually, this is not realistic in my opinion in terms of how much of an angle you have to get at to chainsaw it effectively. Usually, I'm at like a 25, 35, sometimes 45-degree angle to not get the traction to be able to kick up enough snow into that tunnel to cool it down. But it goes fast. And the key there is just don't get yourself stuck in that specific spot because you can. This is kind of what I mean by you kind of start to trench down, you get lower and sink lower and lower and lower. And that's essentially the stuck mobiling that we're trying to avoid. All right. Stuckmobiling again, if you this is it's a skill, right? I spent probably more time talking about stuckmobiling than I talked about riding, and because it's something that's just it's inevitable. You're gonna get stuck. It's gonna happen. And just knowing how to get unstuck, and every snowmobiler out there, I guarantee you, every snowmobiler that you pass out there, like, don't be shy to ask for a tug. Just be like, yo, dude, you mind giving me a quick tug, especially if you're just like on the road. If you see somebody else, there's a lot of, when it comes to ethics, pay it forward. Pull out as many people as you possibly can, because you're going to be the person that needs a pull sometime too. All right, so some zone beta. I think the best place to do this applies to everywhere in the country slash world is find the snowmobile zones, go to those groomed trails, go to find the snowmobile associations, find those clubs, go out there and ride. Find, when you're looking at a map, oftentimes the switchbacks and the cut-ins, right, from road to road, that's what you're kind of looking for when it comes to like what is sled skiable terrain, right? You don't always want to be the person that is like, all right, I'm going to put a track in up to here, and then that's advanced intermediate, and even it's questionable whether or not you could even figure out a way to two up through a trail that you put in. Trust the road, right? Just look at different cues in the road to say to yourself, okay, that's where the sled skiing is, right? And even if it is like, obviously this is Vail Pass, or not obviously, but this is Vail Pass, all right? And Vail Pass is a very well managed place. There are areas, this is ptarmigan right here, to be able to actually sled ski in a zone. And this is designed for sled skiing. They'll put a teardrop in down here. This is Queen Bee Barbecue. They'll put a teardrop right here for people to turn around and to ride back up. Now, one good place to check out is go to a cat, look at cat skiing. Where do they ride at? If they're on national forest, they've probably put in road in places that are ideal for motorized and mechanized skiing. I'll get to that and how to coexist there as well. But so look at these things. I'd say beginners beware when it comes to off-road maps, because again, summer trail is practically an intermediate riding. Start with the groomed trails with the snowmobile associations, and also look into where do the cat skiing ops run. Obviously, if it's run off of like the backside of like Monarch or something, like good luck, you're not going to be able to access that terrain. Or like Keystone, like no, you're never going to be able to use that. But like in pure backcountry, not like side country, quote unquote side country stuff. I'm going to crank through this one. This is just maps, rest in peace fat maps. um Riding etiquette, this is what I mean. Respect the cat ops. If you are in a cat skiing zone, realize and respect the fact that the only reason that you're going to be able to ride there so easily is because they're the ones that put the road in. Vail Pass is not necessarily the case, but with Jones Pass, it is 100% the case. No, those groomed roads, and a lot of the roads that they put in for the pickups and stuff like that, they do not exist. They thank them, drop off beer, offer them shots at the end of the day, and give them some gratitude. But most importantly, I think give them space when they're out there with the group. Like, it is not, yeah, sure, you can look at where hey, look, that's where they dropped off a group, but don't go and like, go follow them and just go like, well, not by follow them. I mean, yeah, if you give them enough time to get out of the zone, but like, don't drop in right on top of them. Don't be like, hey, can I follow your group in? No, those guides are responsible for their group. They're not responsible for somebody that just came in and just is like, hey, I want to learn the zone. Like, that's not what they do. So usually if I see a cat op, I'm trying to stay away from them, not from like, hey, they're freaking dicks, like, stay away, but it's just to give them their space to do their own thing. Come in after they've left the zone. There's plenty of POW. I'm in the 15 years that I've been riding at Vail Pass. It's been getting busier, but I've never been there and on a good snow day and not been able to get a fresh line because it got tracked out. Like it just doesn't exist. Like it's so difficult to track out a zone, in my opinion, when it comes to even the easiest access of places. So, give them space, give them, the line in between the line is going to stay fresh. All right. Like it's okay to cross a track every now and then when you're in the backcountry. Like it's not the end of the world, but it is helpful just again to know that, and give them the respect that they put in the road, to do it. Um, let's see. For the sake of time, I'm probably going to skip through the rest of it. Just cover off on a few things when it comes to ethics. Be respectful. Pack it out. If you're having, if you're doing fires and stuff like that out there, again, be considerate. If you want, there is an interesting, I don't want to say divide, but there's definitely a sledder culture and a backcountry ski culture, and you are balancing the middle of the two. You're going to have people that don't like you on both sides that you are sled skiing. So, be considerate. Like, don't go freaking blasting, railing, full throttle past that group of, two ski tours that are going to the hut. Like, they didn't go out there to freaking eat your wake and, get deaf from your snowmobile flying by. Cruise by them, use and just be respectful. Don't be a dick. That's like my big thing when it comes to the backcountry. Just don't be a dick. And remember that, because it's there. If you want it to stay public for everybody, like, you got to treat it like that everybody is using it, and that everybody is has an equal right to be there and enjoy that terrain at the same way that you want to do it. So that's my 2 cents on that. Hand signals. This is something that is important from perspective. If you cross another group and you see somebody, put up a fist or a one or a two or a three, that means how many people are behind them. It's not like a rock on, dude, here, through, yo, peace sign, man, or I'm number one. That's not what it means. It means like how many people are behind that person. And it's, if you have people behind you, it is important that you tell them too, like, hey, I've got 2 sleds behind me. It's not how many people are getting towed behind you. They can see that. It's how many other snowmobiles are going to be coming up behind you. So that's what I mean by hand signals. Say hello, be friendly, know what frequencies people are on. If you're in an epic and you know that there's another, group around, like, sometimes it doesn't hurt to just be like, hey, I'm going to hop on their channel real quick and just ask for a quick tug. And just knowing where everybody is. And I'm going to skip the avalanche education part. Just know before you go, essentially stuff. Staying alive. Yeah. B, get yourself learned. And yeah, so we are, if I remember correctly, we are going to put this presentation up. Don't just join our community. We're on Weston Backcountry Community, but it's good to, hop into some other, it's, if you're only used to backcountry groups, snowmobiling groups are, like I said, a little bit of a different breed, but it's very important to learn that community, because they know how to work on these sleds too. They know the zones, even though they might be a little bit more tight-lipped about it than even your traditional backcountry skier. But it's a great place to get out there and learn. And I'm stoked that now there's even there's motorized airy courses. There's motorized rescue courses. If you're up for an airy one and you're into snowmobiling, honestly, the rescue skills are the same, and everything's the same. It might be a good way to meet some other people that are like-minded, that want to ride, in the backcountry safely. So go find a mechanized, a motorized airy one, or two. So yeah. So yeah, hope everybody gets something out of this, and I hope everybody it gets out there and slays a lot of POW, and that hopefully this helps to smooth that curve a little bit more. I know here we set the QR code in your email and stuff like that, but again, just hop on Weston's email list, get onto our website. We'll probably be posting this up sometime too. So, and again, hit us up too. I if you guys can't tell, this is what I'm very passionate about, getting people into the backcountry and enjoying nature in ways that might not have seemed possible. And for me, sled skiing has opened me up to snowmobiling, which has opened up a whole nother world of terrain to go out and explore and enjoy. So, I hope that if everybody can get through the stuck and enjoy the stucks and realize that that's just part of the territory. It's not always the sexy just two up in on hitting hits that you see on the movies and stuff like that. It's a lot of stuff mobiling. The struggle is real when it comes to snowmobiling, and if you can get over that, then hopefully you're just going to be able to have a whole nother thing that you can go and enjoy the snow with, in addition to your skis and your boards. So heck yeah, yeah. I hope you guys are enjoyed this. Get out there, slay some POW. If you have any extra questions, we can stay on as well. So yeah, thank you all.
Hell yeah, Leo. Thank you.
Oh, nice. Looks like do we want to stop there?
We can stop
Any
here.
questions, Leo? You're welcome.
We'll stop the recording and post this up online. So share to your friends, anyone else who missed out tonight. This will be available. So thanks, y'all.
Was that Ben Hilly?
No way.
Well, I saw a Ben, and I know I
Ben,
saw,
show
yeah.
yourself.
No, he signed off, I think. I see.
Oh my
What's up,
God.
Steve? Curtis, Charles, how you guys feel about that?
That was great. That was so much good information. Appreciate it.